Good afternoon. How about that rain the other night? That was exciting. And then we're in a thunderstorm watch again for tonight. We might get more rain. Woohoo! But it just means I'll have to mow again here real soon. All right. Couple of announcements. Jim and Jared will present a financial report Sunday. Exciting building changes are about to take place. We've got a construction project that's going to add some family and handicapped restrooms back in the kind of that back corner of the fellowship hall, which has been the nursery. Some work has to take place ahead of that. So on September 7th, after our usual men's breakfast, we're the men who are able to. We need your help in the basement to get some cleanup done. They're asking for at least 2 trailers to help with that. So hauling off some stuff, it looks like. So there we go. It's exciting. Ladies Eat Out Tuesday, August 20th at 6 p.m. For more information, see Tracy. There's a come and go party for Anna planned, Anna Grange planned August 24th from 1 to 3 p.m. at Loving Care. It's going to be her 90th birthday, isn't it? Is that right? I think her 90th. So that's good. And there's an ice cream party coming up. That'll be fun, September 7th. So Saturday, September 7th. I think I can be there. I think I have to be there. I think I'm cooking hamburgers. So the September 7th at 6 p.m. Is that going to... We'll be done cleaning by then. We better be, because I got to make ice cream and cook hamburgers. All right. Johnny. Oh, I didn't read that far. I didn't read past the ice cream and hamburgers. Come for the ice cream and hamburgers and stay for the games. All right. And bring a friend. That's the last thing it says. They're awesome. So, awesome. All right. Any other announcements I need to do better? Mr. Lee. Okay. Okay. Lonnie Ensmaker passed away of Ensminger. Okay. And then tell me the name of the director of the senior center. Sally Scott will be having surgery. She's got some cysts on her pancreas. And so pray for both of those, the Ensminger family and the Scott family, as they go through their difficulties. Other prayer requests tonight? Okay. Well, at this time we'll have our song.
Now the day is over, night is drawing.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time that we can be here together to study your word, to learn from it, and to take things from it to apply to our lives and to share with those around us that we see, that we work with, that we go to school with, just whoever we may see. Please let us be confident and open enough to be able to share your word and your love with everyone that we come into contact with. Father, we thank you for the rain that we have received and the rain that we'll most likely get this evening. We're thankful for that, but please keep everyone safe throughout the rain and the storms that may come. Father, we pray that you be with the two that were mentioned tonight, the one that is going to be having surgery. Please be with her and her family and the surgeons and the whole team that will be taking care of her during that time. Let it be successful and just the recovery time go as planned. Father, pray that you also be with the one that passed away, be with his family, be with those that were close to him and that knew him, and just pray that you give them comfort at this time, as we know that only you can. And Father, we pray that you continue to be with Carol's family, be with us here as we're mourning her loss, but just pray that we can all feel just comfort knowing that she is with you. Father, we just pray that you be with us through this time. Let us be just mindful of what your word has to say for each of us and apply it to our lives. Thank you mostly for your son and the sacrifice that he made for each and every one of us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Bible class, Bible class. I still wonder why none of y'all react that way none of my 8th graders reacted that way coming to math class. Okay. I feel like I got the new headset here recently, and it still is not quite molded to my face. Okay, we are in Daniel chapter 11. And we're going to try to cook, as the kids say, and cover some ground tonight. We've got chapter 11. Chapter 12 is short. And we are about to get ready to wrap up Daniel. So I predict that tonight, next week, we'll be through. I think, pending elder approval, I'd like to do Wednesday night. So if you guys can approve this real quick, Galatians, Ephesians would be great to go with our topic of the Spirit that we've been talking about. Does that sound okay? Galatians, Ephesians is what we'll do next for Wednesday night. So we'll be heading there. Okay, quit messing with that and just is it good? Okay, here we go. So we started chapter 11 last week of Daniel, and just to kind of recap a little bit of where we're at in chapter 10, Daniel has a vision, and he sees a guy that we've talked about his identity, and we've kind of hemmed and hawed around that a little bit. Is it a pre incarnation of Jesus, or is it an unnamed angel? Is it Gabriel, the angel that we've seen in the past, just kind of appearing in a different role today? We can't nail that down for sure, but those are the options. And then chapter 10, 11, chapter break is in a really bad spot. Chapter 11, verse 1 should be the last verse of chapter 10. This is not Daniel speaking in 11:1 when it says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I rose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. That's the same speaker, that unidentified speaker of the last chapter. So that's who that is speaking. It's got to be, because that thought continues into verse 2, and the one who is speaking says, and now I will tell you the truth, and goes into some prophetic things. So it's not Daniel that's speaking there. It's got to be that heavenly speaker. So and just to recap this, because this is where we ended last week with verse 4, says, "Now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a fourth will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong enough through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. And a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. But as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority which he wielded, for his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others besides him." So we talked about the identity of the people that are being talked about in this section, verse 2. Who is the current king while Daniel is having this vision? The king of Persia. Do you remember who that is? Starts with C, ends with Iris, Cyrus. Okay, so Cyrus is his name, and he is the current king. And so there will be 3 kings after him, then a fourth. And we identified that fourth king. Who's that fourth king? Starts with X. King Xerxes, okay, who is from the book of Esther. Okay, so that's the fourth king that has been identified, and he's going to take the riches of his kingdom that was gathered by Darius the Persian. We've seen Darius the Mede, who was in Daniel chapter like 5 or 6 with the finger on the wall and the writing and the lion's den and all that. That was Darius the Mede. But later we're going to have Darius the Persian, Darius the Great, who comes along. He's going to establish a great kingdom or really build up the kingdom of Persia, and Xerxes is going to benefit from that. He's going to take the riches of that expansion, and what is he going to do? He's going to launch a war against Greece, okay? And that's where we have the battle of the Thermopylae, the 300 men of the Spartans who fend off Xerxes' army for 3 days, but in the end they all die, and Xerxes goes in and wreaks havoc. So, Johnny, that's their what? Their Alamo. Yeah, it was. Remember the Alamo, because 100 years later, 120 years later, Alexander the Great comes along, and 6 more Persian kings have reigned by that time. But Alexander the Great comes along, and he remembers Thermopylae and remembers the Spartans, and he goes, and his goal, although he takes over a lot of territory, he really puts it to the Persians, and he shows no mercy when conquering the Persian Empire. So, Chuck. Right. So no, the one that is in that list of the 4 Persian kings, the 3 kings and the fourth, the third king is Darius the Great, who is like 100 years later. So so he is not the same Darius of Daniel chapter 5 and 6. That's Darius the Mede, and he doesn't reign for very long. He has a very short reign. But Cyrus... 11:1? Oh, in the first year. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Darius the Mede. Yes, and he is. We've talked about him as being like a regional king, or almost like we would consider a governor. Yes, that is the same one that's mentioned in Daniel 5:6, because he is the one that has been appointed by Cyrus the Persian, who is the kind of the big K king. He's the king over the Persian Empire, but the Medes were a shadow government or a puppet government of the Persians. So Darius the Mede is under under the control, under the authority of Cyrus the Persian. So they are both king at the same time, but Cyrus is the big king and Darius is the little king. So. Yeah. All right. So, and then it doesn't help when you have later on, you have guys with the same name. And then you have a Darius the Great. And, well, he was greater than Cyrus, but he did better things than Cyrus did. So there we go. So that kind of gets us through Daniel chapter 11, verses 2 through 4. That's a recap. One thing that is interesting, somewhere, I can't find it, somewhere around here, we have a book that is Jim McGuigan's commentary on Daniel. And I have the online version. I have a PDF version of it on my computer, but I know we have a physical copy of it around here, but I couldn't find it. But he does a very interesting thing with chapter 11. He takes the American Standard, the old American Standard version of Daniel chapter 11, and puts it in one column. And then he has his own paraphrase in the other column. So he is telling the historical events that match and coincide verse by verse with the things that happen in Daniel chapter 11. Because as we move forward from here, it gets really specific. I mean, there's like king after king after king after king that are mentioned by and just loads and loads and loads of history that come down to the certain point that Daniel is really, that the speaker is really trying to get Daniel down to. So Jim McGuigan does first of all, he knows the history better than I do, and he lines it up verse by verse with all the stuff that's going on. So I may refer to this some and just kind of read through some of these things, because we can get, I'm going to get lost pretty quick on all the history of this. But I'll just give you a kind of now that we've talked about verses 2 through 4, here's his paraphrase of verses 2 through 4. So his paraphrase says, "And now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet, in addition to Cyrus, in whose reign the vision is received, Cambyses, Darius the first, Hystaspes, and Xerxes." So he names the Persian kings as part of his paraphrase. Those are instead of just saying there'll be 4 more Persian kings, he names them. And then who shall be Xerxes, who shall be richer than they all, and he shall use these riches, see Esther chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, to stir up opposition against Greece. So he even gives references in his paraphrase of where other biblical things are taking place. Verse 3 says, "And the mighty Alexander the third of Macedon shall gain power and shall rule widely and powerfully." We talked about this last week, that the period at the end of verse 2 and then into verse 3, there's like 100 years of history in that one little punctuation mark. Okay, because it's not, it almost, if you just read straight through, it makes it feel like it's an immediate thing, but it's 100 years between Xerxes to Alexander the Great. So Alexander of Macedon shall gain power and shall rule widely and powerfully. But at the height he shall lose, this is verse 4, at his height he shall lose his power, and his kingdom will be divided, not between his kin, and he names them. Alexander's 2 sons were Roxana and Alexander the Fourth. And they get murdered, they get killed, they don't get to be king. So between his kin, but to Lysimachus, Antipater, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Their rule, however, will lack his success and power, and they will eventually lose the kingdom. So, I mean, he puts names to the parts of the prophecy where we know historically who is fulfilling each little part of the prophecy, which is really, it's fascinating to me that he's aligned all this and got it all worked out. So if you can find Jim McGuigan's book, I bought the PDF version of it through Sunset's website for $8. And what a tremendous tool it is to be able to look through Daniel and get some of this stuff. So he goes all the way down through verse 35 doing this parallel paraphrase, just lining up one historical event after another and showing how it fits in with the text. So if you ask me a question in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to probably look at this and say, oh yeah, that's what this says. His verse 5, I didn't read verse 5. Okay, so verse 5, we hadn't got there yet. Verse 5, that's okay. We did all this kind of last week. All right, so verse 5, it says, and we'll just do verse 5. It says, "Then the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His domain will be a great dominion indeed." So his paraphrase of verse 5 says, "And the king of Egypt, Ptolemy the first," so that's the king of the south. Egypt is south of the Seleucid Empire, which is to the north, if we go back and look at that map. Okay, the orange and gray area kind of eventually merge into one, and then that purple area at the bottom is the south, that's Egypt. So the Ptolemies have that purple area, and the Seleucids have that orange and gray area. And so he says the king of Egypt, Ptolemy the first, shall be strong, and so will one of his generals, Seleucus the first, who fled to him in 316, but Ptolemy the first shall be stronger and have the rule. So we talked a little bit about this last week, that the orange and gray area at first kind of started out as two areas, but there was some back and forth between people of the same family within there, but they fought amongst themselves to gain control of the entire region. And Seleucus the first, who had the gray area, was not going to win that battle. And so he went to the king of the south, who was the Ptolemies, and he asked for their help, and they helped, and he ended up being victorious. So the reason we even have a Seleucid empire in that part of the world for the next 300 years is because he went and asked Egypt for help, and they helped him. Had they not helped him, he probably would have lost, and we'd have been talking about the Antigonean empire instead, because he wasn't going to be victorious on his own. Okay. Yeah. So there you go. Any other questions? I'll teach you to ask a question.
So all of chapter 11 is just
Uh-oh.
all the same speaker from
All the same speaker.
all prophecy.
Yes. Down to verse 35 is all pretty clear, and then we get into some questionable stuff that we'll talk about when we get there.
And this is the chapter that is, this chapter is why everybody, non-believers or liberal scholars want to try to push Daniel to early or late.
For sure. And yeah.
So he's doing this, what, mid-500s?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's going down all the way down to, Antioch Epiphanes, which is
170, 160. Yeah.
exactly, so it's,
Right.
like you said, it's very specific, and you
Yep.
can see it in most of it.
Yeah.
And, it can't be that good, so it's
Right.
really faded, whatever.
They push that date as late as they possibly can, which the latest they can push it is about to the mid second century anyway, because we have copies from the Dead Sea Scrolls that date scrolls of Daniel back into the 2nd century, and so they want those to be like the hot off the press scrolls, like this was a brand new scroll of Daniel and we just shoved it in the library in Qumran and left it. So they want it to be that, as opposed to it having been a copy of Daniel that was from the originals from Daniel's time. So they would push it even later if they could, but they can't because there are scrolls in existence that go back to the 2nd century BC. So there you go. So continuing on, and all of this is going to be this intrigue between the kings of the north and the south. It's going to be that Seleucid Empire and the Egyptian Empire. So in verse 5, they're aligned with one another. They are allies, but that doesn't last for very long, as you can imagine. So verse 6, after some years, they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up, along with those who brought her in, and the one who sired her, as well as he who supported her in those times. But one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. Also their gods, with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, he will take into captivity to Egypt, and he on his part will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. So one thing, it keeps saying king of the north, king of the south, king of the north, king of the south. That's not always necessarily the exact same person. He might say king of the north in one verse, and then the next verse say king of the north, but it's actually the next generation. So we're talking about the kings in those positions, but we're talking about sometimes from one verse to the next, one generation to the next. Because a king rises and dies, a king is murdered, a king is done away with, he loses the battle, whatever, is deposed. And so the next king comes along who's the king of the north or the king of the south, and he's the one acting in that place. So, his paraphrase in verse 5, he's talking about Ptolemy the first and Seleucus the first. But in verse 6, it says, sometime later, Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy the second, shall marry the Seleucid king, and Antiochus the second, Theos. And remember, we've got a lot of Antiochuses, and we're looking for the fourth one, who is Epiphanes. So Antiochus the second is, he's not the really bad dude yet. We're looking, the Antiochus the fourth is the one that's going to do the really, really bad stuff. And we've already learned about him all the way back from chapter 8 in a previous vision. So Antiochus the second, Theos, who divorced his first wife Laodicea, but the arrangement will result in loss for all concerned, for Laodicea poisons the king, Bernice, and her child. Gets rid of all of them. So Laodicea poisons them all so that her child can be the next one on the throne. But a brother of hers, so she thought she was getting away with something, but a brother of hers, Ptolemy III, gains power and attacks the Seleucid king, Seleucus II. Callinicus, son of Laodicea, is very successful, gaining much territory. So she arranges all this through intrigue and murder and gets her son on the throne, only to have her own brother attack her son's kingdom, and her son loses a bunch of the kingdom. So, this is all historical record stuff, and it fits with the description of what Daniel is talking about 200, 300 years before it happens. In verse 8, he returns to live the rest of his reign in peace. That's his paraphrase of verse 8. Verse 9, and he, the Seleucid king, attacks Ptolemy III, fails, and returns to his home. All through this section, anytime a northern king attacks Egypt, he fails. Usually when a southern king attacks the northern, he wins. So it's an interesting little back and forth here. Verse 10, and his sons, Seleucus... Oh, I haven't got to verse 10 yet. Okay, sorry. So, what two kings and kingdoms are highlighted in this section? The north would be the Seleucids. The south would be the Ptolemies. We're talking about the Seleucid kingdom, and the part of it that we care about is the promised land, right? The Judah and Israel. Well, Judah. Israel's gone. But we're talking about Judea, and we're talking about Egypt, and their parts of their kingdoms that coincide with one another.
You studied this before, I remember the north is Syria?
Yeah, it would be, Syria, Syrian Empire would be another region that we would associate with them. If you go back and look at any of those ancient kingdoms, the Assyrians, the Hittite kingdoms, they're all up there in that area. So it would have been a synonym or a pseudonym maybe for them. Okay. Verses 10 to 19, his sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces. And one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to his very fortress. The king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given to the hand of the former. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. For the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years he will press on with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many will rise up against the king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city, and the forces in the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him, and he will also stay for a time in the beautiful land with destruction in his hand. He will set his face to come with the power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it. But she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Then he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many. But a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. So he will turn his face toward the fortresses of his own land, and he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Did you get all that? That's clear as can be, right? If you know your ancient history, it just falls right into place. In verse 14, who joins the king of the north in battle against the king of the south? The violent ones among your people. So remember, let's not forget who's speaking and who's he talking to. So the man dressed in linen is speaking to Daniel, and he says, the violent ones from among your people. So who's he talking about? Talking about Jews that are siding with the enemy against their own interests. They are not they're not doing what they ought to be doing. So they are apostate Jews, as we would think of them. So they are committing treason against their own people. Because as these battles rage back and forth and eventually don't go the way the leader wants to do, often what they would do is then turn back. I got to defeat somebody. So if I didn't defeat the enemy to the south, I'm going to choose a subjugated people within my own borders, and I'm going to wage war against them just to make myself feel better. Because I got to beat somebody. I got this whole army together. We got to win something. So we're going to go take it out on somebody else. So you've sided with this person, gone into battle with them. The battle didn't go well. Now he's going to blame you for it, and he's going to come attack your people. So not a good thing. We could go through this section and name names of people that none of us know, but his paraphrase, for instance, in verse 14, at this time, many warlike Jews will ally themselves with Antiochus III, so that's who the king is at this point of the north, and thus help him to victory, but this shall be on their own undoing, since Antiochus IV will thus be enabled to rule over Palestine. If Antiochus, and I guess I said a minute ago, I think the northern kingdom, I thought, never won when they attacked, but they did in this case. And since he won, that enabled him for his son to take over in his place, which ended up being a really bad thing. So you went to war, you helped him win, congratulations, here's the worst king of all. That's not good.
16, when it says beautiful land.
That he gained control of Palestine. The beautiful land is the promised land, the Palestine, Judea. So gained control of that. Other thoughts on that section? I mean, it's just a back and forth of battles, and we could name the specific battles if you want to know the names of the battles. Even some of them he puts dates now next to them. Verses 20. Yes, he does say Cleopatra. He shall then seek to establish his home front by exercising his power in an equitable way toward the Jews in contracting a marriage between his daughter, who is Cleopatra, but she is his political pawn, and the boy Ptolemy V. So, we started out with Ptolemy I and Seleucus I, right? And now we're to Ptolemy V and Antiochus III. That's, so we've had that many generations has come down. So Cleopatra was a daughter of Antiochus III. This arrangement did not work to his advantage, it says. Ended up not being a good deal. All right, verses 20 to 28. Then in his place one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom, yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. In his place a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception. And he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army, So the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they'll speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. So how does this despicable king come to power? By deception. Yeah, he didn't earn it. He doesn't deserve to be king. But yeah, reminds me of Absalom. Okay, only even worse. I mean, he lied, cheated, stealed, and murdered to get his way to the top. And once he got there, he lied, stealed, cheated, and murdered to stay there. He's just a despicable king. So who are we talking about? This is the Epiphanes. This is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. This is the one that we spent so much time talking about in chapter 8. And this is the one that very significant things are going to happen under that have to do with the timing of things that we've talked about, the number of days, the counting of the years, all this stuff. And so this is kind of the epicenter of historical shifts taking place that bring about kingdom changes that signify to us that God is in control. I mean, God is the one working behind the scenes all the way through this, through his sovereignty, to bring about the changes that need to happen in order for the eternal kingdom finally to come about. And as bad as all this stuff is that's happening, it all needs to happen so that we can have the precursor of the kingdom and set things up right for the Messiah to come.
When is this? And he destroys Jerusalem?
He sets his eyes against Jerusalem and ends up ransacking the temple and doing the desecration of the temple and everything in one. Yes, this is once. Yeah, so the war against Ptolemy the sixth is in 170, and after that he gets really mad and goes and wreaks havoc against the Jewish people. So it's like 168 that all this takes place, the really bad stuff. Any clarification on any of that from verses 20 to 28? Any paraphrases you want me to read? Why is he despicable? Because let's see, it said in verse 27, as far as for both kings, and this is the Ptolemy king that he was dealing with as well, their hearts were intent on evil, and they spoke lies to each other at the same table. So even when they tried to sit down and negotiate a peace, they just lied to each other to try to gain the upper hand against the other one so that they can continue the war at the other one's expense. So, so they were just intent upon evil. Right.
Which tells you that all this is God's plan, because it's all happening on his timetable.
Yeah. And that's the paraphrase of that highlights that. He says, all their apparent candor and joint projects discussed will mask only evil intentions. Neither of these kings will ultimately benefit anything, since their end is appointed by God. Both kingdoms will fall. Neither one of them are going to survive the next couple of generations. So God has appointed their fall already. Okay. Next section, 29 to 35. At the appointed time, he will return and come into the south, but this last time will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him, and therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly according to the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Okay, so I think out of everything that we've read so far, this is the part that starts to feel more familiar, or starts to feel like it makes sense a little bit, because he's talking about now maybe not individuals of historical but not biblical significance, and now he's talking about historical events, but they're of great biblical significance. Not, I mean, you understand what I'm saying. There are things that pertain to spiritual concerns. It's not just the intrigue of secular armies fighting against one another. Now all of a sudden we have God's people entering the picture, and we even had an indication that those who remain faithful are going to act. In some ways they're going to be successful, but in some ways they're also going to be they're going to be persecuted. They're going to be hurt. And so, I mean, some of this feels almost decipherable to me. Like I could almost figure this stuff out on my own if I didn't have a commentary in front of me. So, how is the sanctuary profaned?
All the times it says Holy Covenant and my covenant, Prince of the Covenant and all those things, is that used or issued or?
Right. So those who are, so in verse 30, it says he, and this is the he here, we're talking about Antiochus now. We're talking almost completely about, the bad guy, the villain in this story is Antiochus Epiphanes. So he will become enraged at the Holy Covenant. And Antiochus Epiphanes hated God. He hated the idea that anything was God but him, or that anyone would revere a holy being other than himself. And so when you had devout Jewish people who were committed to serving Jehovah through the sacrifice and through the law and through the feasts and those things, and even as he was trying to sway them against those things, and he did early on, Antiochus Epiphanes did things like parade through the street and throw money to the poor, and tried to endear himself to the people by pretending to be good. And so he did things to try to win them over so that they would think he was a good guy, and they still serve their God. How could they do that? Don't they see how nice I'm being to them? So he hated God, and he hated the people that followed God. And so when he devises a battle against Egypt, and then it's the ships of, if we go back, the ships of Kittim, it says, that's ships from Cyprus, and Cyprus by this point was under Roman control. We have the next kingdom entering the picture. So Rome, and this goes back even to, remember your Julius Caesar, and there's Antony and Cleopatra, and I mean all this stuff. Cleopatra is the Cleopatra. Okay, so we're into the time frame now of the Roman Empire starting to build, and so they are starting to exercise some control and some authority over this region. And when those Roman ships show up and they turn Antiochus' army back from attacking Egypt, he is not happy about that. And so he goes back to his homeland, and who does he hate more than anybody else? Well, he hates the Jews because they follow God. And so he unleashes his vitriol and his hatred against them in a spectacular way. So he enters the temple. Verse 31, the paraphrase of verse 31. Let's look at verse 30. So for ships from Cyprus, a Roman dominion bearing Roman envoys shall come and order his withdrawal. They tell Antiochus Epiphanes, don't attack. It's a bad idea if you do.
The story is the latest, it draws a circle around Antiochus and says, you need to decide, if you come out of the circle without submitting to us, you're at war with Rome. You got to decide right now.
Okay,
And so he decides, I don't want to be at war with Rome.
right.
But he's still irritated.
He's still irritated.
He goes back, on the way back.
Yeah, and so that's a thank you for that historical mention. The Roman envoy draws a circle and says, if you step outside of that circle, that's where Rome is, and we're going to be at war with you. And so he has to stay in his own circle. And so for ships from Cyprus, Roman dominion bearing Roman envoys shall come and order his withdrawal. He shall return in humiliation and exercise his rage on the temple and people of God while making use of apostates from the Holy Covenant. So if he could turn Jews against their own, he loved that. So any Jewish person that he could get to side against their brethren, he would promote them and thank them for that. And then verse 31, he will send men and officers who will profane Jerusalem and the temple, causing to cease the daily worship there by offering a pig's flesh on the altar and sprinkling the entire place with pig broth. So he sprinkled broth and blood from a pig everywhere around the temple and profaned it. And that, it made it so not only did he, physically put a stop to the sacrifice because he wouldn't let them do it, but he made it so that they could not sacrifice there because it was now unholy. It was unclean. You could not sacrifice where that pig's flesh had been sacrificed. Verse 32, the apostates will be used, making them more profane, but the people of God will be loyal to their knowledge and relationship with him. And the teachers of the people will teach many, but they too will have to suffer death or captivity during this period of persecution. But despite this, the teachers will find some support in men like Judas. And that's a historical reference to Judas Maccabeus, who was the one who ended up reinstating the sacrifice and leading a revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes. And there will, of course, be those who spy and intrigue for the enemy. The persecution which the loyal will have to undergo will work out for their own benefit ultimately. They will have to suffer until God puts an end to the Seleucids, for, make no mistake, it is appointed. God wins. Okay, so despite how bad it's going to look, while Antiochus Epiphanes is at the height of his power, doing the worst of what he's going to do, it basically never looks worse than that, but God still is in control and he's going to bring about his will. So there you go. That gets us down through verse 30. I kind of skipped a part, haven't I? Have we even read? Well, I read the paraphrase, but I haven't read the regular. I did? Okay. My goodness. I'm so far behind I can't even remember where I'm at. All right. I did read that. Okay. Yeah, because we talked about how the sanctuary is profaned. They sprinkle the blood stuff and the pig stuff everywhere. And what happens to the faithful? Well, they suffer, but they benefit from it. They benefit from remaining faithful to God. And so there you go. Chuck.
Okay, so the sanctuary's been in
Mm-hmm.
So, how did they get it back to where it was sanctified again?
Right.
How did they, what steps?
That is one of those historical things. They have to do the purification rituals, and if you look at that's what the Feast of Hanukkah is all about. That's about they have the menorahs that have eight candles on them, and that's to commemorate what their stories say. In the time of Judas Maccabeus, that the menorah burned for 8 days in the temple during the purification process, even though they didn't have the oil for it to burn 8 days. But it burned 8 days with no oil because God perpetuated the flame, is what they believe. So, so they light the candles for the 8 days to commemorate the 8 days of that candle burning with no oil during that time of purification. So that's all I know about Hanukkah. But that's where that comes from. So,
I know, back in Leviticus,
they
everything talks about,
pre-
sprinkling the blood, here and there.
right. Presumably, they would have looked back at the law and done the same steps that were done to purify the original temple, sprinkling the blood and going through that whole purification rite. Same with the priests. They would have known through the lineage who was next, who was supposed to succeed the high priest, whether the high priest had been able to maintain his position during that time, even without the sacrifice, or even in hiding or whatever, I don't know, or if they had to repurify a new high priest or whatever, but they would have gone through that whole process once again.
That's why it's so important for them to have a genealogy.
Right, yeah. Genealogy was everything. They had to establish lineage all the way back to Aaron for the high priest. Yeah. Okay, so starting in verse 36 to 45 through the end of the chapter, it says, then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished. For that which is decreed shall be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show the regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. But instead he will honor a God of fortresses, a God whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. He will take action against the strongest of his fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him. He will cause them to rule over the many, and will parcel out land for a price. At the end time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, over all the precious things of Egypt. The Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels, but rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. All right, so we move from, we've been nailing down like specific battles and dates, specific people that fit right into the prophecies that have taken place up to this point. And then in verse 36, it kind of goes sideways. We can't do that after this. We can't put some specific dates and things to it. And so there's a couple of views of this, and really, Homer Haley identifies 9 possible views. Some of them are outlandish and crazy, and we're not even going to talk about them. So basically, the 2 that I'm comfortable with are the 2 that are on the board. It could be that it's a continued description in some way of Antiochus and the havoc that he wreaks upon God's people. The problem with that is that Antiochus never does anything to gain control of the gold of Egypt. He never does anything with Libya and Ethiopia and those nations. He never has any interaction with them at all, and certainly never conquers them. And so as we start looking at some of those things that are mentioned as being things that this king does, we run out of ways that Antiochus fits the bill, especially kind of from the time frame that we're at, where the desecration, and then he doesn't have very long to live, too many more years after that. It's a short amount of time, within a couple of years. So we got to pack some things in there that don't seem to make sense. So the other possible scenario is that we've made an abrupt switch from Antiochus, and we've introduced the idea that Rome is entering the picture and gaining control. And now that Antiochus Epiphanes' end has come, that we've just made the switch where now anytime we talk about he who represents the king of the north, we've switched king of the north to be the Roman Empire. And that's kind of an abrupt, weird change, but we had an abrupt, weird change back in between verses 2 and 3, if you'll remember, right? We were talking about the kings of Persia, and then all of a sudden it says, and a new king comes along, and who is he? Well, he's the king of Greece. And 100 years has passed, just really abruptly. So in prophecy, sometimes things, shift gears really fast. We've already seen it happen, and it could be that it's happened here, where all this is a description of Rome, and Rome did conquer Libya and Egypt and Ethiopia, and they did do a lot of the stuff that would fit with the descriptions that take place in this passage. So that's kind of my leaning at this point. I went back and read my notes from the last time I taught this back in like 2010, and back then I leaned a little more towards Antiochus. But after reading through all the stuff today, it's like, well, I think I'm leaning the other direction now. So if you want to lean one direction or the other, I'm not going to throw anything at you. Chuck?
Whoever it is, I mean, he's doing the same thing.
Right.
He's always magnifying himself above every god.
Yeah.
Thinking against the God of gods. I mean, he's doing the same thing as what how do you say his name?
Antiochus. Yeah.
He's doing the same thing. I mean, it's the same description.
Right.
What he was doing.
And with some of those Roman emperors, what do we see? We see them exalting themselves as God. We see them standing against God's people, even though we have a shift under the during the time of the Roman Empire from where the Romans certainly oppressed the Jews along the way when they were God's people, but the Romans also make that shift and they oppress God's people once Christ has come. And so whether we're talking about the Jews as God's people or the Christians as God's people, Rome fits the bill as those who oppress God's people. So, clear as mud, as one of my old teachers used to say. I appreciate people like Jim McGuigan that have written commentaries to help this all make sense. And Jim McGuigan even kind of along the way says, I could be wrong on some of this stuff. This is my best. This seems clear to me. It seems to fit, and boy, it really seems to fit, and it makes sense when we look at it this way. And so, I don't know of a way to look at it that makes more sense than what we presented tonight.
What about that last part of 45? I mean, is he talking about the Roman Empire? And he will come to his end and no one will help him?
Between the seas of beautiful, and yet he will, yeah. Pitch I believe so. I've got, let's see, verses, I have his commentary open on my phone here. Verses 40, let me see. There shall be delivered out of his hand, Libyans and Ethiopians. Yet he shall come to his end. A plain declaration of his success, that he is able to settle various places. And in particular, he settles his authority in the Holy Land. He plants his tents between the seas, the glorious holy mountain Jerusalem. So that would be the king of the north representing the Roman Empire. Here is a by the way statement. The reader is not to suppose the king is unstoppable. He will prosper until he has served God, but then the Lord will bring him to the tombs when he has served God's purpose. But when asked how long the vision reached into, the messenger tells Daniel until 70 AD. That doesn't exactly say that, but that's what we're going to come down to. Right. Yep. So we'll wrap up chapter 12 next week and kind of wrap everything up. Whew! We're getting close. And then we'll wrap up and then we'll take a test.